Okay, we're going to be looking at how to answer child's language acquisition question, which is paper 1, question 4. This is the question that I looked at. However, it doesn't matter which question you answer for question 4, there will always be the same basic premise, which is to consider, is it nature or nurture that allows us to acquire language? So just to remind ourselves about the nature versus nurture debate, nature suggests that we are born with some innate ability to learn language, whereas nurture says that it's really all to do with our environment, about the way that people train their children to speak. So on the nature side, we've got Chomsky and Piaget. Chomsky developed the concept of the LAD, the language acquisition device, which is basically an innate ability or mechanism that allows us to learn language. This is supported through the concept of a universal grammar, the idea that we all learn language at similar rates across the globe, regardless of language. You know those stages as the holophrastic, telegraphic and post-telegraphic stages. The other theorist is Piaget, who suggested that we can't verbalise language until our brains have reached a certain level of development to allow us to do so. On the other side, we've got Skinner, Vygotsky and Bruner. Skinner believed that people responded to stimulus just in the way that rats and pigeons do. He believed that we responded to something called operant conditioning. Basically, if you say nice things about somebody's abilities, they'll continue doing it, and if you're horrible about it, they'll stop doing it. Vygotsky was the zone of proximal development guy, and Bruner talked about the need for quality input from the caregiver and how scaffolding showed children how speech should be done. So I'm going to be looking at the case study of Jace and Mother. Really important bit to read before you even start looking at the transcript is the age of the child, because that will tell us what they should be able to do at that point in terms of syntax and pronunciation. There's a list of all the things that they should be able to do at certain ages. Just remember to learn this, and we'll come back to it later as we go through the analysis. So happily, these essays are structured in a very similar way to the change and diversity essays. Just state both sides and then say, is a hotly debated topic in the field of linguistics. Then you go on, add a little bit more detail, maybe the name of the theorist, and then with this one we have to relate it to the case study. So say why this case study would be important in this particular question. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to focus on one side of the argument for half of the essay and then the other side of the argument for the other half of the essay. Before you even begin, if there is something specialist such as CDS that they've talked about, make sure you explain what that thing is so that the examiner knows that you understand what you're talking about. So the next bit is to go straight in with the theorists. So you say what the theorists believe, such as Skinner, arguing that children acquire language by imitating others, and then pick something from the transcript that supports that, or at least relates to it. Now, the thing with this, and this works in with the evaluation, is whether or not the case study actually supports what that theorist has said. Now, in this case, it actually doesn't support what Skinner was saying. However, that's good because it shows that you're actually evaluating, does this thing work or does it not in real life? Then go on to the next theorist. I've got Vygotsky. Make sure that you're using the actual proper linguistic terminology as you go through this. So notice how I use sort of phonemes to talk about what can be achieved in the zone of proximal development. So then I go off and talk about Bruner, and I bring in the case study of Jim, just to show that I can, basically, that I know that there are other case studies that relate to this. But then one thing that I do which actually is on the mark scheme at stage 5, is I consider contextual factors. There's clearly a delay in JC's speech, but there's nothing in the transcript to suggest why that might be. So we've got to consider what's happening outside of what we can see here. We do notice that JC's mother raises her voice at some point. Is that because she's becoming frustrated with JC? There is a delay, even though she's doing all of the things that all those 3 input theorists suggest. So what's going on? Is she just not doing it enough? It is sort of criticising her parenting. However, we do have to consider those other factors. Then consider the other side of the argument, and it really is as simple as on the other hand. So we start talking about Chomsky, I say what he thinks, and then I relate it to the case study. But once again, it doesn't really work because obviously Jace has this delay and isn't fulfilling what we would expect to see from the holophrastic stage. Once again, it's really important to use the actual linguistic terminology here. So I talk about the fact that really he's just doing reduplicated babbling, which is very delayed considering that he's 14 months. And then I relate it to Piaget and Berker and Brown, once again to show that I can, basically, that I'm aware of those case studies. Really, the only thing I've left out of this essay is the WUG test and the Genie case study. However, I could include those. It's just I feel that we probably have run out of time by then. So the last bit is the conclusion, and we're basically just restating the sides of the argument and saying whether or not the case study has supported it or not. So let's have a quick whiz through the mark scheme. So we should be in level 5 applying linguistic methods and terminology and identifying patterns and complexities, which we do. And over for AO2, critical understanding of concepts, which are basically the theorists. So we're looking at the theorists and seeing whether they work, synthesizing ideas and conceptualizing a view of the process. So yes, that would be referring it to the case study. Exploring contextual and cultural factors, which is what I was talking about when, like, what other reason could there be for the delay in JC's speech? It really is basically, are you talking about the theorists? Are you talking about contextual factors? Are you talking about linguistic terminology and applying it to what the child is saying or is not saying? Okay, if we follow all of that, we should be fine. Good luck.